Okay, so for 10-4, there's really nothing crazy happening here, other than that we're learning two vocabulary words, angle of elevation and angle of depression, okay? So angle of elevation is formed by a horizontal line and the line of sight of an object above the horizontal line. So this right here is the angle of elevation, and then the angle of depression is an angle formed by a horizontal line and an object below the horizontal line. So that's the angle of depression. Now, if both of these horizontal lines are parallel, which they always are, then these angles right here are alternate interior angles, making them congruent. So the angle of depression is the exact same as the angle of elevation for the same line of sight for two different horizontal lines. And just as a reminder, vertical lines are always perpendicular to horizontal lines. So in this situation, we end up with a wonderful right triangle in which we can use the basics of all the things we learned in Chapter 10. Pythagorean theorem, special right triangles, and trigonometry. Depending on the situation, we'll use it. This is at the bottom of one of my posters, but it's also just very helpful information for if you don't know how to solve a problem. It's on the bottom of my poster, but I also want it to be here for you guys. So let's look at some example problems with this. Some of the times you're just going to be asked to identify whether it's an angle of elevation or angle of depression. For example, angle 1. It's from the bird's sight looking down. So that's angle of depression. But from the human looking up to the bird, that's an angle of elevation. The human looking down to the beach, that's the angle of depression. The beach looking up to the human is an angle of elevation. So that's something to keep in mind. And then we could actually solve problems with it. Let's look at this one. They drew out the picture for this, but we could have easily drawn out the picture ourselves. Suppose a building is located 400 feet away from the wind turbine, and they're standing there, and the angle of elevation is 35.5 degrees. So that's our angle of elevation, and it's wanting to know how tall is the turbine above ground. And so we can do that by, we identify, we have an angle. It's not 30, 45, or 60. It's any other angle, so we're using trigonometry. If we're using trigonometry, we first need to identify which trig we're using. So based off this angle, I'm trying to find the opposite, and I'm given the adjacent. So I'm going to use tangent. Tangent, TOA equals opposite over adjacent. So I could set this up as tangent of 35.5 degrees equals the opposite is x, the adjacent is 400. And then solve using the skills I've learned in 10-3. Put it over 1, cross multiply. I end up with x equals 400 times the tangent of 35.5. Just as a reminder of how to put this into the calculator, I say 35.5 tangent times 400 equals, so x equals 285. Okay, so that is very important to know how to do. Just understand that angle of elevation and angle of depression just helps us to understand how to solve problems. Same thing here. I want to point out this problem specifically because if we understand that this angle of descent right here, or angle of depression, is 3 degrees, this angle is also going to be 3 degrees. So we can put it in here and use a right triangle. We could also use a right triangle on this side, but either way, we'll be finding the same thing. Okay, and I want you guys to understand that very clearly. So those are all the questions that will be asked. Just as a reminder, we can always use 90, and that this angle isn't also going to be 3 degrees. If we wanted to find this angle, it would be 90 minus 3. So this angle would actually be 87 degrees right here, and this angle would be 3. So please keep that in mind, but that's what 10-4 angles of elevation and depression are all about.